Hi, welcome back. Let us now see on how leading global organizations focus on their expenditure. Their expenditure can be segregated into two areas, internally and externally. The lately trend clearly shows that an organization spent on internal labor and overheads are decreasing simply because of there are initiatives on automation and process improvements in order to increase their efficiency. So, when automation and efficiency increases, spent on laborers, spent on non-value added activities or areas would be decreased. Whereas these organizations also focus on things that they are not superior of. Example, most of these organizations are now outsourcing their non-core activities. They clearly understand what are their strengths are, and they make sure then the rest of the activities are outsourced to a supplier or a partner that are specialized in that particular activity. Also, with the technology development, the organizations can scan the market and see where they can get real value so that their business objectives are met. So more these external expenditure increases, more the procurement function gets involved, because the procurement function directly links with this external expenditure. Just look at the chart below. It shows how the procurement division has got involved for the past 50 years and the contribution that they are making to an organization in a manufacturing industry. In this slide, we discuss on how the role of purchasing have changed during the past few years. Previously, the purchasing function was just seen as a cost center. It will receive specifications from their respective user divisions, and their responsibility is just go to the market and buy those for the cheapest price. But today, that role has been seen as a proactive buying role. Purchasing is being seen as a value-adding division, and today the trend is the purchasing division along with their key suppliers contribute to the specification. Today, leading organizations, the purchasing division, the user division, the project teams, and the key suppliers, who are called the partners, they sit together and they design the specification which is most suited to the organization. Let's take another variable, the price. Previously, price was the most important key aspect of a buying division. But today, with the proactive approach, the price is one aspect only. Today, the focus will be on the total cost of ownership and the value that will generate from that engagement. Another example, negotiations. Previously, because the procurement division was so focused on price, the outcome during negotiations would be a win-lose, meaning the procurement team will either win and the supplier will lose. If the procurement team doesn't get what they really want from a price point of view, they lose and the supplier wins. But in today's world, the negotiation is more win-win because both parties understand their objectives very transparently. So the negotiation will most of the time end up in a win-win situation. One last aspect, stock. Previously, the impression was to have plenty of stock because then it's security. You will not run out of stocks. But with the proactive buying approach, with technology also getting involved and adding value, now in the current day, the procurement division along with the supply chain team can manage the stock very well. Plenty of stock means in today's business world is waste. So this slide shows you how the procurement role has changed from a reactive buying perspective to a proactive buying perspective. Now, you all as project managers, how can you link into this scenario? Every project will have a charter, and from that charter, you all will have a work breakdown structure. Project managers can also proactively get the procurement functional team involved in these work breakdown structures where procurements are involved from the very initial stage so that planning and identification can happen early in the process. That will give time to the procurement function to make sure that they discuss with their suppliers in order to provide the correct specification to that particular need at the correct price, at the correct quantity, so that overall value could be generated. The first picture in this slide shows how a transactional relationship works between a buyer and a seller. This is how it used to be some years back. The buyer will specify what they really want, and the seller will provide what is requested. And in return, the buyer will pay the seller. It's a very transactional relationship. But in today's world, it has evolved into a mutual relationship where the buyer and seller, they work together. So they focus on the common technology. There will be commitment, shared efficiency, correct information shared, confidence levels are high, and they support each other. This engagement will have a positive impact on project milestones and to make sure that projects are delivered on time in full and they are a success. In this slide, we will be discussing about a tool that is commonly used by the procurement community around the world. It is called the Procurement Positioning Tool. There will be two variables that will be looked into. One being the risk and second being the potential profit or the savings to the organization from a respective procurement. If you closely look into the picture and the graph, the y-axis would represent the risk, which is either high or low, and the x-axis would represent the potential profit, or in the other words, the savings. Let us now just focus on the top left-hand box. In that box, it represents procurements where the risk is high but the potential profit or the saving is low. Ideally, the organizations would not like to focus on these procurements because the return is very less, but in terms of risk, it's very high. And therefore, it's called bottleneck procurements. Now let's move towards the bottom box on the left-hand side, which is called routine. All the procurements which are low risky, but again the potential of profit is also low, is categorized as routine procurements. Generally, these are the procurements where you do on a day-to-day basis. Since there's a learning curve, the risk is very low, but the savings you generate, since it's a commodity, is also low. Let's move on. Let's look at the top right-hand box. It's a very important area. That box is dedicated for procurements which are high in risk, but also the profit potential is very high. Let's see some examples. Think about the milk powder example that we spoke about. Not having the direct materials in-housed on time will be a high risk for an organization who are selling milk powder. But if you have them in-house, definitely the production will be on time and the sales would be done. So the potential profit or the savings would also be high. Now let us focus on the bottom right-hand box. In this area, the risk will be low, but the profit potential or the savings would be high. So ideally, the procurement function should leverage on these procurements and make sure that they do more procurements in these areas. Now, from a project management point of view, why is this important for us? In a project, first you need to identify what are the important procurements and what needs to be sourced. Then you need to categorize those items into one of these four boxes to identify what you need to avoid or slow down and what are the areas that you need to really speed up. If the project managers understand this, it will be a very easy journey along with the procurement team to complete the procurements. Risk is a common word that has been used in business engagements. What is a risk? From a definition point of view, risk is a potential of gaining or losing something of value due to an action or inaction which are foreseen or unforeseen. So, from a business perspective, risk could be in two ways. One, it could be a supply risk where your continuous supply is interrupted. So from a business process point of view, your supply is not as expected, which is impacting your business operation. So as a result, you cannot output what is expected for your customers. The second risk would be a technical risk. A risk which could arise during or after an installation. So let's take an example. Let's go back to our milk powder example. If your milk is not supplied on time, then you do have a problem or an issue in your supply, which will impact your sales. Even the machines that you bring down to convert this milk into milk powder are not delivered on time. It is also categorized as a supply risk. One of these machines, after installation, faces through a technical issue, and therefore your production slows down, and that would be a technical risk. The procurement team and the project management team needs to focus on these risks that could slow down your projects. It is very important that the project managers have their contingency plans or plan Bs if this risk occurs, so that your project will not be on hold and will be completed as per the agreed timelines. In this slide, we will look into few factors which will give you a better understanding on the term risk. I have listed down few factors that you would come across in your day-to-day business and how that will become either a higher risk or a lower risk. Let's take few examples. Let's talk about the experience with the product as a factor. If an organization is purchasing something for the very first time, of course they do not have any experience or exposure with that product. In that context, the risk could be high because the probability of doing things wrong is very high. But when you move on from your first purchase to your second purchase, the organization has some understanding on the product or the service and how it behaves, so the risk factor would be low. Let's look at another example. Supply chain complexity. In your supply chain, there could be many parties. The original product could be manufactured by an OEM. An OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer. And then from the OEM, it goes to an agent, it goes to a distributor, and then it might come to your organization. So there are so many parties which will add cost and which will add lead time. So in terms of getting those in-house, from a time perspective and a cost perspective, it's a high risk. But if an organization directly purchases something from the OEM, then all the intermediaries are taken away. So your lead time goes down and your cost also reduces, which means your risk is low. One last example, the manufacturing complexity. If you are manufacturing something which is really complex, then of course the outcome would be at a higher risk. But if you are doing something very simple, straightforward, definitely the risk is very less. So we need to understand that every factor that we look into in a business world would have a risk. Either it would be high or it would be low, but it will depend on the particular situation. So we need to be smart enough to identify that situation, and if it's a high risk, you need to come up with plans on how to mitigate that risk or avoid that, and make sure the projects are completed as per the agreed milestones. In this slide, let us discuss on how a procurement function can add value to the profit or the bottom line of an organization. If you all recall, we discussed in our previous slides on how the procurement division or the function manages the spend of an organization. It's roughly about 70%. In today's business world, rather than just placing orders, the procurement division focuses on a scientific approach to question each and every procurement to make sure that the correct specification is met, the correct prices are obtained, correct commercial terms are agreed, and of course to make sure the items are delivered on time. Let's look at few examples on how the procurement division adds value to the bottom line. The first one would be reducing of the total cost of ownership. In simple words, TCO. We will be discussing on this concept in our future sessions. But in a very high level, TCO would be focusing on the total cost rather than just on the purchasing cost. Let's take an example. If you are buying a machine, the price of the machine could be 1,000 euros. That will be a purchase cost. But if you look into a 5-year lifespan, just think about the other cost, the maintenance cost that you will have to incur for this machine. If you look into the entire cost of the 5-year period, that will be your total cost of ownership. There could be some machines that your purchase price could be cheaper, but if you look into the overall TCO of 5 years, it could be very much high. Whereas there could be some products where the purchase price is high, but the maintenance cost is less. So it is advisable that any organization who makes a purchasing decision should make the decision based on a TCO value. So when procurement divisions makes the correct decision based on the TCO, it's a benefit that is given to the organizational profit or the bottom line. Another example would be continuous improvement of the procurement process, increasing the efficiency. In today's world, where competition is very high, you need to make sure that you are always ahead of your competitor. In order to do that, the procurement function should make sure that their suppliers deliver the respective raw materials or whatever inputs on time. So, if the procurement division can ensure that the suppliers can deliver their input as per the agreed timelines, then that will ensure that your production will be on time and subsequently your sales will be on time and you will beat your competition, which will have a direct impact on your profit again. In this slide, let us look into a few factors in which there will be a potential for the procurement function to get involved. Every transaction or engagement will add some sort of value, but the organization or the project team needs to carefully assess and needs to decide the areas that they would really need procurement to get involved. Let's look at few factors. If you are looking at a structure of the market and the organization has a need, if there are so many players or suppliers in the market who can provide either a product or a service to cater the required need, then there is a high potential that procurement should get involved. The reason being, they can competitively evaluate each of these suppliers and make sure the best product through the best supplier at the correct price is being sourced. But on the other hand, if there's only one supplier, then the options are very less. So the potential of procurement getting involved and getting a benefit would be also less. Let's look at the spend as well. For a particular requirement, if the allocated spend or the budget is very high, then you need to make sure that you get involved the procurement team, because you need to make sure that you get the correct supplier in. Otherwise, all what you spend will be a waste. But if your spend is a low amount, then the risk is also low. Depending on the value, organizations can decide whether they need to get the procurement division involved or not. Let's look at another factor. Efficiency of the procurement process. If an organization is using the same old process to all procurements with no or little automation, then definitely they need to get the procurement division involved. The reason being, the products that you source should be differentiated based on number of factors. It could be the value, it could be the time, it could be the complexity. So you need to have a customized process, but an overall governance structure for procurements. But if already contracts are established, then the involvement of the procurement team could be less, because a systematic approach is already in place. One last example. Development of the procurement process. There is a tendency where the user divisions interacts with the suppliers in a process upfront without getting involved the procurement divisions. Ideally, the procurement people should sit in these meetings from day one so that they understand the requirement from the scratch in order to make sure that the correct supplier is being selected.